January 6, 1907, page 148. The whole thing has become so bizarre and twisted, I hardly know where I fit in, or what my feelings are. I'm shaken, unsure of my own feet on the ground, and that is all I know for certain. Maybe it was my desperation, my need to understand. I don't know. After arriving home from Mary's, I couldn't sleep. I spent the night watching the moon rise and set, feeling very alone. I have to return to the office, I decided, and look through Mr. Soper's private notes, all the way back to the time when I visited Anushka, even before that, to see what I had missed. It's the only way I would understand Mr. Soper's unpredictable behavior, I thought. I left a note for Marm. I dressed before dawn, and just as the first streetcars began running, I hurried through the cold up to 14th Street. Our office building was unlocked. I thought the cleaners were already at work, and I entered. Instead of turning left toward our office, however, something made me stop. The laboratory. No one would be in there so early. A tickling started inside of me, a curiosity as to how the room might appear without all those staring eyes. I turned right and walked to the great laboratory, and I could see through the glass door that the globes were lit. But there wasn't a soul inside. I decided to go in to explore further. I leaned on the first desk and touched the microscope with one finger. I closed my eyes and imagined what it might be like to be working in that room all day, studying our world from the inside out, and the feeling was glorious. At that moment I felt so happy, as if I truly understand my purpose for life. And then I heard someone say, "Looking for me?" I turned and I saw a peculiar science fellow at the other end of the room, coming out of the closet. Behind him, rows of jars shining like teeth. I stood up straight, caught. He was holding a bottle of white powder, which he put down, and slowly he started walking towards me, his face wolfishly pointed. I wanted to back up and run away, but the door made what seemed a mile off, and my legs still as logs. "What a nice surprise," he said. "You came to see me." "I can't say I was expecting you," he said, all the while advancing on me. I felt mesmerized by the glittery look in his eyes. My arms tingled. I had never felt frightened of him before, but now, with the building empty, he seemed much bigger than me. "I know you came in here the other day with Mr. Soper, just so you could be near me," he said. I couldn't believe my ears. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You weren't interested in seeing no typhoid germs," he said. He sat on the desk close to me. Sitting that way, he overshadowed me like a tree. "You're sweet on me, aren't you?" he said. His hands seemed ready to touch me, and I folded my arms over my chest. I don't even know you," I said. A strange sensation came over me. I felt that if I ran, he'd chase after me. "Sure you know me," he said. He was so close I could smell his gutter mouth. I tried to keep the tremble from my voice, and I asked, "Why do you speak to me this way?" He laughed and slid closer. "I wouldn't do that," I choked out. I tried not to show my fear. Why couldn't my feet move? Just a few steps back. "Oh, really? Not even a little kiss?" he asked. "You're so serious all the time. I just want to give you a little kiss to make you smile." I tried to back away from him, but my legs were frozen. I felt tears stinging my eyes, but I willed myself not to cry, and I shook my head. He leaned towards me, and I turned my face. Holding my breath, I felt his mouth coming nearer, in my mind, pushing him away. I heard the door open behind him, and thundered, "What on earth is going on in here?" I opened my eyes and saw with immense relief it was Mr. Soper. The fellow backed off, immediately pointing at me, saying, "She came in here." Remembering why I was really there, I felt my mouth open in protest, but no words came out. I could only shake my head, fearful of what scene might look like. The fellow said, "I was trying to get some work done, and she interrupted me." I covered my cheeks with my hands. I couldn't look at Mr. Soper's face. My gaze stuck to my feet. "Prudence, why are you here so early?" Mr. Soper asked. I shook my head. I couldn't tell him my plan to look through the private notes. "You can finish your work later, Jonathan. Get your coat. Go see if those samples from the Robertson laboratory are ready. I'll take care of this," Mr. Soper said. "Thank you, sir," the fellow muttered. I could feel my hands ball into fists. I watched that boy put on his coat and leave the room. A thin layer of ice covered Mr. Soper's countenance as he closed the door after him. "I have to say I'm utterly shocked and surprised by your behavior. It is most unbecoming," Mr. Soper said, his face sour, as if he encountered a wharf rat. I still couldn't find anything to say. "Perhaps I made a grave error in hiring you," he said. "No!" I exclaimed, the word escaping my throat. "We do not have many women working here, and perhaps there's a good reason for it. The very presence is distracting. But I thought you were different, more advanced than your sex. I see I was wrong," he said. "Please, no," I said, meeting his eyes. "Mr. Soper, please, don't think that you were wrong about me. I don't know that boy, and I don't care a whit about him." "What are you doing here, then, Prudence?" he said, with his face still tight against me. I told him about the lights being on and my awful curiosity, and I told him about the boy's attention to me from the very beginning and his advancement on me, and I began to cry. I couldn't stop myself. I stood there, covering my wet face with my hands, trying to hide the tears, trying to stop crying, trying to show him that I was no girl, which only made me cry harder. Mr. Soper took out his handkerchief and came to me, dabbing my cheeks with his awkward movements. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "I'm so sorry." Mr. Soper sighed, and I could feel the rough hair of his coat on my cheek as he reached for me and patted my back. Near my ear I heard him say, "It can only bring trouble. You're so young and lovely." I smelled his fragrance, his sweet cologne, and I pressed my forehead into the crook of his arm. He gently extended his arm, pushing me away as he straightened my shoulders. He wiped the last of my tears with his kerchief. "We will send for you a carriage to take you home now, Prudence. You can return tomorrow when you feel better." I don't want to leave him just then, but I could see in his face that there was no other choice. I put on my hat and told him that the boy lived 2 blocks from me, and I feared another incident. He seemed troubled by the mention of the boy, and he said that he thought that being caught and hopefully embarrassed him sufficiently, and it would be most likely he would bother me no further. Gently my chief led me to the streets by my arm. I felt an ache in my chest. The words he had whispered echoed in my head. Mr. Soper had called me lovely. The force of my feeling for him overwhelmed me, and I climbed into the carriage. I looked into his face, wondering if he was feeling the same about me, but a paternal worry had settled over him, and I felt him untouchable. He uttered something about the office and our work, and then paid the driver and sent me off, and by the time I arrived home, Marm had already left for the Jungerbrook. Here I sit, tangling with this emotional state, trying to wrestle it down. I see that I don't know the first thing about love. It's as if I've taken a poison, one that makes my head dizzy, and it gives me an insatiable thirst, not for water, but for the sight of my chief. I try to stand outside myself to be scientific and unemotional in order for the two people to join. I tell myself humans have been given this feeling. Does that mean that I want to love Mr. Soper? The thought frightens me. I have never even been kissed by a boy, no less a man. I couldn't possibly want love with him. Back up to the bottom of the previous page, about 3 lines up, and you've got the word insatiable. That's one of your vocabulary words. Check your prediction, compare it in context, and see what it means. Go ahead and look it up if you need to. I just want to return to work, to be near him. Maybe I should take a sick leave, stay home, and talk to Mom about my feelings until it dissipated. But I think my old teacher, Mrs. Browning, warning then, and know that it's impossible to talk to her. I could walk the streets all day so the feeling can fly out and disappear into the buildings, but I don't think that it'll go away so simply. I don't recognize myself. I don't want to be me. I want to return to my innocence. I must have my innocence back. I must will it back to me. I've spent a good deal of the day writing about my feelings in a long letter to Anushka, begging her advice. I wait for tomorrow to begin so I can see him again.